At its peak, Internet Explorer owned 95% of the browser market. 95%. That's not dominance. That's a monopoly so absolute that the US government literally took Microsoft to court over it. Every computer in the world came with it pre-installed. Every website was built for it. Every person who touched the internet between 1999 and 2004 was almost certainly using it. And then it became a joke. Internet Explorer's only purpose is to download Chrome. You've already seen the memes. You've probably made the joke yourself. But how does a product go from 95% market share to being a punchline? How do you lose so completely that the company behind you, one of the richest in human history, eventually gives up and adopts your competitor's technology? That story involves two browser wars, a federal antitrust trial, one of the worst security nightmares in computing history, and a lesson about what happens when a monopoly gets comfortable. Let's start from the beginning. To understand how Internet Explorer fell, you need to understand what the internet looked like before it existed. In the early 1990s, the World Wide Web was brand new. Tim Berners-Lee had invented it in 1989 at CERN, but for the first few years, browsing the web was mostly a text-based affair for academics and researchers. The first browser that regular people could actually use was called Mosaic, developed in 1993 at the University of Illinois. Mosaic was special because it could display images in line with text. Before that, images opened in separate windows. It sounds like trivial now, but in 1993, seeing a picture load right there on the page felt like magic. In 1994, the lead developers behind Mosaic left to start their own company. They built a new browser from scratch and called it Netscape Navigator. And Netscape did something brilliant that no other browser was doing it well. It rendered pages progressively. Instead of making you stare at a blank white screen for 2 minutes while the entire page loaded, Netscape started showing content as it came in. Text appeared first, then images filled in. On the painfully slow dial-up connections of the mid-90s, this was transformative. You could actually start reading while the page was still loading. That alone made people think Netscape was the fastest browser, even when it technically wasn't always. Perception became reality. Netscape also introduced the loading progress bar, so you could at least see that something was happening. They invented JavaScript, the programming language that now runs essentially the entire modern web. The interface was more polished and user-friendly than anything else available. Individual users could download it for free, though businesses had to pay for a license. Within 3 months of launch, Netscape captured 75% of the browser market. People loved it. When you bought a Windows machine in 1994, installing Netscape was one of the first things you did. In a strange way, Netscape was making Windows more valuable because the web was what made a home computer truly useful for the first time. But Microsoft saw this differently. If people were buying Windows and then immediately installing someone else's software to access the internet, that was a problem. Why should Netscape be the gateway to the web when Microsoft owned the gateway to the computer? In August 1995, Microsoft released Internet Explorer 1.0, bundled with a Windows 95 add-on pack. The first browser war had begun. And yes, that's the actual name, I'm not making it up, it has its own Wikipedia article. So, did Microsoft immediately build a superior browser and win on merit? No, not even close. Internet Explorer 1.0 was objectively worse than Netscape in almost every measurable way. Slower rendering, fewer features, worse JavaScript support, but Microsoft had something Netscape didn't: the operating system itself. Microsoft's first and biggest advantage was pre-installation. Internet Explorer came bundled with Windows. Even today, most tech users don't bother changing their default browser, and in the mid-90s, the barrier was even higher. Millions of people were getting their first home computer. They didn't know what a browser was. They didn't know alternatives existed. They turned on their computer, clicked the blue E icon, and that was it. That was the internet for them. But bundling wasn't enough for Microsoft. They actively worked to prevent Netscape from being installed on new computers. Microsoft struck deals with PC manufacturers, paying them to ship machines without Netscape pre-installed. If a manufacturer wanted favorable Windows licensing terms, they played ball. They were eventually forced to stop this practice, but by then the damage was done. Microsoft's second advantage was pricing. Netscape was free for individual users, but businesses had to buy licenses. Internet Explorer was free for everyone. No license fees, no enterprise pricing, nothing. Microsoft could afford this because they didn't need Internet Explorer to make money directly. Windows sales covered the cost. Netscape couldn't match this. They had hundreds of engineers to pay and no operating system revenue to subsidize a free product. There was also the standards problem. In the mid-90s, web standards weren't well established. Different browsers supported different features, and websites often worked properly in one browser but broke in another. Website owners started placing badges on their pages: best viewed in Internet Explorer or best viewed in Netscape. This fragmentation forced users to pick sides, and since Internet Explorer was already on their computer, many chose Internet Explorer. Microsoft also played a dirtier game at the API level. They made certain Windows level programming interfaces available only to Internet Explorer. giving it performance advantages that third-party browsers couldn't match. They were quite literally using their operating system monopoly to build a browser monopoly. Despite all of this, Netscape still held strong through 1998. In a 1996 survey, Netscape had 89% usage, while Internet Explorer sat at just 3.76%. Netscape was the better product and users knew it. Then Netscape made the mistake that killed them. Netscape was feeling the heat. Internet Explorer was free, it was everywhere, and Microsoft was spending enormous resources to improve it with each version. To stay ahead, Netscape kept cramming new features into their browser as fast as possible. The codebase became increasingly unmanageable. They were shipping on Windows, Mac, and Unix, and the cross-platform code had turned into a tangled mess. In 1998, Netscape made a decision that software engineers still debate to this day. They decided to rewrite the entire codebase from scratch. Joel Spolsky, one of the most respected voices in software development, later called this the single-worst strategic mistake that any software company can make. The problem with a ground-up rewrite is that you're throwing away years of accumulated knowledge. Every bug fix, every performance optimization, every weird edge case that was handled, all gone. You're starting from zero while your competitor keeps shipping. That rewrite meant no new version of Netscape for 2 full years. 2 years is an eternity in the tech industry. During that gap, Microsoft released multiple Internet Explorer updates, each one better than the last. When Netscape 6.0 finally launched in November 2000, it actually had impressive features. Themes, tabbed browsing. Yes, Internet Explorer didn't have tabs in 2000. Better standard compliance, but it was buggy because it was rushed out before it was truly ready, and those 2 years of absence had been devastating. By 2000, Internet Explorer's market share had surged to 86%. Netscape had fallen to under 14%. In 1998, Netscape had sued Microsoft for anti-competitive behavior. They won the lawsuit in 2000, but it was a hollow victory. The market had already moved on. Winning a court case doesn't win back users. Netscape 7 launched in 2002, but it was too little, too late. AOL, which had acquired Netscape, disbanded the Netscape team in 2003. Internet Explorer had won the first browser war completely. I think it's worth pausing here to talk about what was happening in the courts, because the United States versus Microsoft Antitrust case is one of the most significant tech lawsuits in history. The Department of Justice and 20 US states filed suit against Microsoft in 1998, alleging that bundling Internet Explorer with Windows was anti-competitive behavior designed to destroy Netscape. This trial produced some legendary moments. Bill Gates' video deposition became notorious. He was evasive, argumentative, and at times seemed to be redefining common English words. When asked about specific emails he had written, he frequently claimed not to remember them or disputed what they clearly said. The judge Thomas Penfield Jackson was visibly unimpressed. In 2000, Judge Jackson ruled that Microsoft had maintained its monopoly through anti-competitive means and ordered the company to be broken into 2 separate entities, one for operating systems, one for everything else. Microsoft appealed the decision. The appeals court also found that Microsoft had acted anti-competitively, but overturned the breakup order. Eventually, Microsoft settled with DOJ in 2001 under the new Bush administration. The settlement required Microsoft to share its APIs with third-party companies and submit to oversight, but many critics called this a slap on the wrist. Microsoft kept Windows and Internet Explorer together, and the company was never broken up. And also, Netscape was dead. The practical effect: by the time the legal dust settled, Internet Explorer had already won. The lawsuit confirmed Microsoft had behaved badly, but it didn't undo the market dominance that behavior had created. Here's where the story gets really interesting, because this is where Microsoft's victory sowed the seeds of its own defeat. Internet Explorer 6 launched on August 27, 2001, alongside Windows XP. By August 2002, Internet Explorer held 95.97% of the browser market, complete, total, overwhelming dominance, and Microsoft made the decision that would eventually destroy everything they would build. They stopped trying. The Internet Explorer development team was largely reassigned to other projects. Microsoft saw the browser war as won. Why invest resources in a product that had no competition? The browser was just a feature of Windows now, not a product that needed its own roadmap. For 5 years, no new major version of Internet Explorer was released. 5 years. Internet Explorer 7 didn't ship until October 2006. Let's put that in perspective. In 2001, Google was still a search startup. Facebook didn't exist. The iPhone was 6 years away, and most people connect to the internet through dial-up modems. By 2006, broadband was widespread, social media was emerging, and the web had evolved dramatically. Internet Explorer 6 was designed for a completely different internet. During those 5 stagnant years, Internet Explorer 6 became the most hated piece of software in computing history, and it earned that reputation. The 6th version of Internet Explorer's biggest technical sin was ActiveX. This was Microsoft's technology that allowed websites to run small programs directly inside the browser. In theory, it enabled rich web applications. In practice, it was a security catastrophe. ActiveX controls had deep access to the Windows operating system. A malicious website could install software on your computer, access your files, or turn your machine into part of a botnet, all through the browser. Internet Explorer 6 shipped with security settings loose enough that many ActiveX controls could install without meaningful user consent. The result of this was an explosion of spyware, adware, and malware. By the mid-2000s, studies estimated that the average Windows PC connected to the internet through the Internet Explorer had dozens of pieces of unwanted software installed. Security firms built entire businesses around cleaning up the damage Internet Explorer 6 enabled. It got so bad that in 2004, the US Computer Emergency Readiness Team, a division of the Department of Homeland Security, took the extraordinary step of recommending that people stop using Internet Explorer entirely and switch to a different browser. When a government agency tells civilians to stop using your product for national security reasons, you failed at a fundamental level. The other disaster was web standards. Internet Explorer 6 had broken incomplete support for CSS and HTML standards. It interpreted web pages differently from every other browser on the market, had dozens of unique rendering bugs, and supported Microsoft's proprietary features that only worked in Internet Explorer. This forced web developers into an impossible situation. Because Internet Explorer held 95% of the market, you had to build for Internet Explorer. But Internet Explorer's broken standard support meant that you were essentially building for Internet Explorer's bugs rather than the actual web. Developers spent countless hours writing Internet Explorer hacks, special code that compensated for Internet Explorer's rendering mistakes. A movement began to form, the Web Standards Project, pushed for browsers to implement standards correctly. Websites like CSS Zen Garden demonstrated what was possible when browsers rendered CSS properly. Developers started speaking publicly about how Internet Explorer was holding the entire web back. This developer resentment would prove crucial. When alternatives finally appeared, web developers didn't just switch, they evangelized. They told their friends, their families, their coworkers. The people who built the web became the most passionate advocates for abandoning the browser that dominated it. But here's the thing, where were those alternatives supposed to come from? Microsoft had 95% of the market. They had the operating system, they had the distribution, they had the money. Building a browser engine from scratch takes years and costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Who in their right mind would try to challenge that? Well, remember Netscape? The company Microsoft crushed into nothing. In its final days, Netscape did something that seemed meaningless at the time. A lost, desperate move that nobody paid attention to. They open sourced their entire browser code and handed it to the public. Microsoft didn't care. Netscape was dead. What could a bunch of open source volunteers possibly do against the most dominant software product on the planet? Turns out, everything. In 2004, from that open source code, the Mozilla Foundation released Firefox. Here's a fun fact to drop at dinner. Firefox was originally going to be called Phoenix, symbolizing its rise from Netscape's ashes. Trademark issues forced a name change. Firefox was everything Internet Explorer wasn't. Fast, secure, customizable with extensions. It had tabbed browsing, still not existing in Internet Explorer by the way. It respected web standards, and it was backed by the Mozilla Foundation, a non-profit which gave it a grassroots credibility that a corporate product couldn't match. By 2006, Firefox had carved out significant market share, and Microsoft was finally forced to respond. Internet Explorer 7 shipped in October 2006, adding tabbed browsing and improved security. But notice what had happened. Microsoft was now following trends, not setting them. They were playing catch-up. Internet Explorer 7's market share data tells the story. In 2006, Firefox held around 12 to 15% and it was climbing, while Internet Explorer had dropped from 95% to the mid-80%. Still dominant, but the trajectory was clear. Then, in September 2008, the real threat arrived: Google Chrome. Google didn't just build a browser, they executed one of the most well-crafted product launches in tech history. Before Chrome even shipped, Google published a comic book explaining their browser's architecture. Not a press release, not a white paper, a comic book illustrated by Scott McCloud, the cartoonist behind Understanding Comics. It was accessible, shareable, and it made technical concepts like multiprocess architecture feel exciting. The tech press covered it extensively before the browser was even available to download. Chrome's interface was radically minimalist. Look at the screenshots of Internet Explorer 7, Firefox 3, and Chrome 1 side by side. Internet Explorer and Firefox had toolbars, menu bars, status bars, sidebars. Chrome stripped almost everything away. The top bar sat at the very top of the window, the address bar doubled as a search bar, the rest of the screen was your web page. It looked like the future, but real evolution was under the hood. Chrome introduced multiprocess architecture to the consumer browser market. Each tab ran in its own isolated process. If one tab crashed, the others stayed alive. This sounds obvious now, but in 2008, it was extraordinary. Browsers crashed constantly back then, websites were less stable, and losing all your tabs because one site had a JavaScript error was a regular occurrence. In Internet Explorer 7, 10 open tabs meant one crash killed everything. In Chrome, the broken tab died alone. Everything else was fine. Chrome was also actually fast. Google had built V8, a new JavaScript engine that compiled JavaScript to machine code before executing it, rather than interpreting it line by line. For JavaScript-heavy web applications, which were increasingly common as Gmail, Google Maps, and the other web apps matured, Chrome was dramatically faster than the competition. Google was also shameless about promotion. They put Chrome download ads on google.com, the most visited page on the internet. Billions of people saw try Google Chrome every day. They ran YouTube ads showcasing Chrome's speed with visually striking tests. And once people tried it, they told others. Word of mouth was powerful because the product backed up the hype. Then there was the update cycle. Chrome updated automatically roughly every month. New features, security patches, performance improvements, all delivered silently in the background. Meanwhile, Internet Explorer didn't ship until March 2011, 3 years after Internet Explorer 8 in 2009. While Chrome shipped dozens of updates, Microsoft shipped one. You might wonder this: how did Firefox and Chrome fund all this development? Chrome was backed by Google's advertising empire. The browser was a strategic investment, not a profit center. If Chrome made the web faster and more capable, people used the web more and Google sold more ads. Browser was a means to an end, and Google could afford to make it free and excellent. Firefox was funded through search engine deals. Mozilla received hundreds of millions of dollars from Google and later Yahoo to be the default search engine in Firefox. Combined with donations, this gave Mozilla enough resources to compete without needing to sell a product. Neither Firefox nor Chrome faced the funding problem that had killed Netscape. The economics of the browser market had fundamentally changed. Now you could be free and still gain money. In 2009, Internet Explorer had 62% market share, Firefox 30%, and Chrome 0.2%. While in 2010, Firefox had 34%, Internet Explorer 48%, and Chrome 10%. From that point on, Internet Explorer continued to decline, and the biggest loser of the second browser war was the Internet Explorer, which plummeted from 95% to around 6%. Internet Explorer fell from 95% to single digits, the biggest collapse in browser history. While consumer users fled to Firefox and Chrome, there was one place Internet Explorer 6 stubbornly survived: the corporate world. Throughout the 2000s, thousands of companies had built internal web applications, intranets, HR systems, financial tools, specifically designed for Internet Explorer 6 and ActiveX. These applications used Microsoft proprietary features that simply didn't work in any other browser. Replacing them meant rewriting critical business software from scratch, which cost millions of dollars and years of work. So corporations kept running Internet Explorer 6 long after it became a security liability. Some companies were still requiring Internet Explorer 6 in 2014, 13 years after its release. IT departments knew it was dangerous but couldn't justify the cost and disruption of migration. This created a bizarre split. At home, people used Chrome or Firefox. At work, they were forced to use a browser from 2001. This contrast made Internet Explorer's reputation even worse. Every workday was a reminder of how terrible the old internet felt. Eventually, Microsoft themselves joined the campaign to kill Internet Explorer 6. In 2011, they launched a website called the Internet Explorer 6 Countdown, with the explicit goal of reducing Internet Explorer 6 usage below 1% worldwide. Microsoft was actively asking people to stop using their own product. That's how bad things had gotten. By 2015, Internet Explorer's total market share had crashed to about 13%. Microsoft knew the brand was toxic. Internet Explorer had become synonymous with slow, broken, insecure, outdated. No amount of technical improvement could fix that perception as long as the name stayed the same, so they killed it. In 2015, alongside Windows 10, Microsoft launched a completely new browser, Microsoft Edge. The rebrand did shift some perceptions. Edge had a new logo, a new interface, a new name, but under the hood, the first version of Edge still ran the Microsoft's own rendering engine, Edge HTML. And Edge HTML, despite being much better than Internet Explorer's old Trident engine, still couldn't match Chrome's Blink engine in its performance and compatibility. The compatibility problem was especially painful because Chrome now dominated the market. Web developers tested and optimized their sites for Chrome first. Edge users regularly encountered websites that were slightly wrong, had visual glitches, or were outright broken. The dynamic completely inverted from the Internet Explorer 6 era. Now it was Microsoft's web browser that couldn't render the web properly because the web was built for someone else. Building and maintaining a competitive browser engine is staggeringly expensive. You need teams working on rendering, JavaScript execution, security patches, developer tools, extension support, media playback, accessibility, and 100 other things. Even with Microsoft's vast resources, they couldn't keep Edge HTML competitive. Sometimes money alone isn't enough. The numbers proved it. Edge launched in 2015. By 2018, its market share had fallen to 5.9%. The new name and new interface weren't enough. The engine underneath was still the problem, and don't forget, the browser is still coming pre-installed. Microsoft also didn't help its own cause with aggressive tactics. Windows 10 pushed Edge on users constantly. Pop-ups ask you to give Edge a try. When you tried install Chrome, default browser settings were buried in the menus. The start menu showed Edge recommendations. Instead of winning users through quality, Microsoft was nagging them, which only made people resent Edge more. After all this, Microsoft announced the most consequential decision in the history of their browser division. They were abandoning Edge HTML and rebuilding Edge on Chromium. Google's open source browser engine. This was Microsoft admitting publicly that they could not compete with Google's browser technology. The company that had crushed Netscape through sheer force of power was now adapting its rival's code. The new Chromium-based Edge launched in January 2020, and the difference was immediate. Speed was on par with Chrome. Website compatibility issues vanished overnight. All the sites that were optimized for Chrome now worked perfectly in Edge too, because also Edge was running the same engine. Freed from the burden of maintaining their own rendering engine, Microsoft could focus on what they could actually differentiate on: the user interface, enterprise features, vertical tabs, collections, sleeping tabs for memory efficiency, and tight integration with Microsoft 365 and Windows. This strategy worked. People who installed Windows and tried Edge no longer felt an urgent need to download Chrome. The performance gap was gone. Compatibility gap was gone. Edge was just Chrome with a different cost of paint and some genuinely useful Microsoft-specific features. Current statistics show Chrome at roughly 70% of market share, and Edge at around 5 to 6%, actually ahead of Firefox. We also have to notice this: there are far more internet users today than a decade ago. Because of this, that 5 to 6% represents a significant number of people. Edge is no longer a punchline, it's a legitimate browser. But think about what it took to get there. Microsoft had to completely surrender their own engine and build on top of Google's technology. The company that once controlled 95% of the browser market is now a tenant in Google's ecosystem. Okay, here's where this story circles back on itself in a way that should make everyone uncomfortable. Chrome currently holds about 70% of the global browser market. It's pre-installed on every Android phone. Google.com promotes it to billions of people daily. Gmail and Google Workspace occasionally show warnings suggesting that things work better in Chrome. Web developers test in Chrome first. Some web apps are built exclusively for Chrome. Does this sound familiar? The complaints from the web development community are starting to echo the mid-2000s. Chrome, critics say, is becoming the new gatekeeper. Google proposes new web standards and implements them in Chrome before other browsers have a say. Chrome extensions, which many people rely on daily, are governed by rules Google sets unilaterally. The Manifest v3 changes, which limit the capabilities of ad blocking extensions, were driven by Chrome team decisions that the community had little power to influence. In 2024, a US federal judge ruled that Google maintains an illegal monopoly in search. While that case was primarily about search, Google's browser dominance is deeply intertwined. Chrome funnels users to Google Search promotes Chrome, and the cycle reinforces itself. The parallels to Microsoft in the late 1999s are hard to ignore. A dominant tech company, a browser bundled with its platform, competitors struggling against the distribution advantage, and government antitrust action. The question is whether Google will repeat Microsoft's mistake, getting so comfortable with dominance that they stop innovating and let the next challenger slip through. The history of browsers suggests that no monopoly lasts forever. Netscape was dominant until it wasn't. Internet Explorer was dominant until it wasn't. Chrome could be dominant until it isn't. The technology industry punishes complacency more harshly than any other, and the moment you assume you've won is usually the moment the ground starts shifting beneath you. Thank you for watching, and before you go, I would like to share a source available software as a service I created, OpenFrame. With OpenFrame, you can review videos with your team. Everyone sees the same timeline and will be on the same page. You can share images, voice note, annotations, B-rolls on the timeline, which will make your editor's job easier. You can pay $10 a month and invite your team. No, you don't have to pay for seats, just $10 a month, that's it, and you can invite everyone you want. And the best part is, if you don't want to pay, you can self-host it yourself, because you can find the code in GitHub. You can explore OpenFrame by clicking the link on the description. Now, we just spent this entire video talking about who controls the browser, and by extension, who controls your access to the internet. First, it was Microsoft, now it's Google. Chrome knows every site you visit, every search you make, every click, every scroll. But what if you didn't want any of them watching? There's an entirely different layer of the internet that most people think requires some illegal hacker ritual to access. It doesn't. You can get there by downloading one different browser, but the way that most beginners do it leaves them completely exposed, trackable, and one bad click away from a serious mistake. I made a video breaking 4 levels of accessing the dark web, from the basic setup anyone can do it in 2 minutes, to the extreme configuration used by people whose lives genuinely depend on staying anonymous. I'll link it right here. See you there.